Hi there, my name is Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. This is a channel where we discover and discuss themes of healing childhood trauma as well as other topics such as life and love and all the various things in between. If you're interested in those kind of things, please click like and subscribe. Today we're going to be looking at the subject of how do we be honest about what's happening in the world without ending up being cynical. And I'm really asking the question, how do you do that? I need help. Please help me, someone. How do I not end up cynical? And I probably should have written the title, How Do You End Up Less Cynical? Because how do you end up without any cynicism and be honest, I think is not something I've arrived at. So what I'm going to look at today is just how I really try to be less cynical whilst at the same time remaining honest. And this is what we're looking at, is the issue of honesty and not being cynical. And when I say honest, I'm not being pessimistic. I'm not being negative about what's happening in the world and misanthropic and despairing. I'm just saying honest. Now, I do have a little bit of a cynical streak. I do have a part of me that is a little bit maybe overly critical, and I can be a little bit negative, so I'm aware of that. I'm willing to own that. I mean, I like Squidward, I like Bert, I like Oscar, I like Grumpy Cat so much I even put him in the thumbnail. So I know I have a tendency a little bit to look on the cynical side of things, but I think there's an honesty required looking at the world we live in, the state we're in, where it's going, that isn't cynical, it's just honest. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, say, well, where are we? Like, where are we right now in the world? What is the current state of play in global affairs? How do we take that in, and how do we be with that reality, be honest about that reality, and not ending up feeling cynical? So let's have a look. Where are we today? Let's just have a brief kind of run through on what's happening in the world right now. A mass extinction event is on the horizon if marine life keeps fleeing the equator. You read other reports, the mass extinction event is already actually happening. World on the verge of a climate abyss as temperature rise continues, UN chief. That doesn't sound good. Humans consume 73% more resources than the Earth can regenerate. I'm not very good at maths, but I don't really like those numbers. Over a third of the Arctic shelf could collapse as climate change warms the Earth. Whoopsie! The average adult will spend 34 years of their life looking at screens, poll claims. As I tell you this on a screen, looking at a screen. How's that for irony? Countries bombed by the US since World War II. Well, at least Australia's not on there. How the world's wealth is shared amongst its population. Declining sperm count could reach zero in just 24 years. 3 million a year die to a lack of food. How's that for a terrible, horrible, obscene reality we live in? And just to give it some context, the United States spends more on defense than the next countries combined. And now, to acknowledge we're really in a civilization, end of times scenario, Bachelorette, season 17. Season 17, The Bachelorette officially has an air date. Oh my God. Now, that is just a small snippet. You can go into in-depth analysis of ocean acidification, nutrients drying up from the soil, global warming, climate collapse, nuclear issues, global inequality, war, pandemic, etc., 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 etc. And it goes on and on. And a lot of those articles are just recent ones. They're from the last few weeks. So that is the world we're living in. And that isn't to say there aren't good people. Obviously there are good things happening. But that is the reality of things. We are heading towards a major climate collapse. It will most probably happen in my lifetime, if not in the lifetime of my children, but it's happening. We are moving in that direction. And that's not being negative. That is just the reality of where we are. And it is going to have dire consequences. Millions and billions of people are going to die and suffer in horrible in a horrible way. It won't be pretty and it won't be nice and won't be organized. That's the nature of a collapse. Now that's in front of us. And that's just looking at climate change, let alone all the other things occurring. So how do you be aware of that and be honest about that and not end up feeling just cynical about people, about life? And I'm just going to share with you what I do to try to reduce that a little bit. Not to the point where I don't have any cynicism, because I think it's very hard to kind of know all that and be aware of that and not have some cynicism. And it's not cynicism against the heart of humans. It's more cynicism against the systems we live in, that where we've come to, where we've arrived at is like this giant oil tanker of sociopathy and craziness that's heading off a waterfall, and it's not going to change itself. It just isn't. And it's got so much momentum behind it that it is, you could argue it's even fallen off the waterfall and it's plummeting towards the bottom. It's just happening in slow motion. And it's hard not to really be honest about that and feel like I'm cynical about what brought us there. I'm cynical about who's driving that ship. But I'm also aware that it's not just these evil people in Chevron and for these fossil fuel companies or arms dealers, that it's me. I'm part of that. I'm part of that world. I'm part of this humanity that's put us here, and I have to take some responsibility, because if no one is responsible, then we're all responsible. And I can't kind of ease my conscience by saying, well, I'm not the one at the helm. I'm here. I'm part of it. So I also can't play that game with myself, or I certainly try not to. So I think there's always going to be a little bit of cynicism there, at least for me. And this is how I try make it a little bit less. So one of the things I do, and this is for the last few years, I just try read that stuff less. I mean, I pretty much know a lot of it, not in a know-it-all way, but I know enough to know this is happening. I'm honest about it. But reading another report, another essay, another article about how bad it is, it just doesn't help me. It just amplifies my already sense of aggrieved angst. And why do I need to find out more? Why do I need that to be amplified? I don't. So I'm just torturing myself to some degree. So I have tried over the years to reduce my intake of that type of news. And I'm certainly not ignorant. I have a good understanding of what's going on in the world. So I don't really need to know anymore. It doesn't really help me on a day-to-day basis. Now, I've not come off my addiction to this kind of news altogether, but I certainly indulge less, and that helps me. It keeps more serenity. There's the stuff that's going on in Gaza at the moment, and all the horror of everything that's occurring there, and I read it, and I just feel, and again, I'm not in denial, but why have that cynicism reinforced? So one thing I try to do is stay away from some of that, not from a position of ignorance, but rather from a position of it's not really helping me. So that's one thing that I do. And the second thing that I try to do is be aware as well that whatever is going on in my cynical mind or my cynical thinking, it takes me away from the present moment, because I am not the head of Amnesty or some big environmental group. I'm not, as much as I know about these things, my day-to-day life is made up of my kids, it's made up of my work, it's made up of my local community, my wife, etc., my friends, and I just try to keep myself grounded in that present moment. That's what's in front of me. That's what I'm dealing with. I'm not dealing with, right now at least, climate collapse. I'm dealing with my kids not getting out of the bathroom in time, and I'm dealing with preparing lunch. I'm dealing with very practical things that are right in front of me. And by grounding myself in that present moment, I bring myself back to the reality that I'm really living in, not the imagined future apocalypse, but just the reality of what's here right now. And that helps me. It helps me to ground myself in the present. The third thing, and this is probably the deepest thing or the most important thing, is understanding that my cynicism exists within a frame or an understanding of the world that is contingent on this perception I have of what's going on, which is going on, I'm not denying it, but it's contingent on this perception being that's all there is. That this reality we live in, the reality I'm perceiving, the reality of economics, politics, and the world that is presented to me is the only reality there is, like a scientific materialism, that this is it. And I don't prescribe to that. I don't see that. I believe that we exist within a wider reality, or we are inside of multidimensional ecosystem that has many levels and layers to it, that has been discussed and explored by mystics and saints of all ages, and that wider reality is something that this is occurring within. And when I remind myself of that, when I bring my attention to that, this reality is nestled in a wider, deeper, more profound, transcendent, whatever term you want to give it, reality, then I feel a little less despondent, a little less despairing, a little less cynical, because my cynicism assumes the way it appears to be is the way it is, that this is kind of it, and this is it only. And given that, it's pretty bad, and there's no good ending here, and that's the end of it. And when I pan that back a little bit, and I try view this within this wider scope, then it takes the saltiness or the bitterness of my cynicism, it just reduces it a bit. Not in an artificial way, but actually in a very real way. I'm not adding sugar to it. I'm just widening the space to include that bigger picture. And when I remember that, I come back to that, I feel less cynical. I feel more hopeful. I feel like, well, this is a story within a story. So that's how I try to deal with it. That's how I try to reduce it. And I'd like to leave you today with a passage from Rumi. And he has a really interesting way of kind of looking at this. And it's not really about cynicism, it's more just looking at that bigger picture that we're not aware of. It's the story of a sperm, and obviously maybe 24 years there won't be any sperms to have this experience. But I'd like to leave you with this short little story, which I think really encapsulates that bigger picture view that helps me so much. So I hope you enjoy this. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for coming here, and please look after yourself. Take care. And if you do not believe what I'm saying, just think for a moment. How could that drop of sperm have believed you if you had told it that God had created another world outside its world of darkness? A world where there is a sky, a sun, a moonlight, provinces, towns, villages, gardens, where there exists created beings, kings and millionaires, people in fine health, sick people, and blind? No intelligence would believe such a far-fetched story, and yet there exists, outside these shadows and this food of blood, another world altogether, and quite another food. And although the drop of sperm ignored and denied such a possibility, yet it could not avoid arriving at it because it was forced outside. One day you will find yourself outside this world, which is like a womb. You will leave this earth to enter while you are still in the body, a vast expanse, and you will know that the words, God's earth is vast, describe this region from which the saints have come.